Hey everybody, Casey here with Life Abstract Gaming, and this week I want to look back on the music of last year. Let's talk about the top 5 albums of 2017. Before I run down my top 5, there are a bunch of albums that I want to highlight for good, bad, and special reasons. You know how you can end up listening to an album really late and then realize you should have been on it like forever ago? Well, a new category I've come up with just for that reason is my most listened to album not of this year. And that honor goes to AM by the Arctic Monkeys. This was out all the way back in 2013, and I took note of how much I loved their first single, Do I Wanna Know. I planned to get it at some point, and some point just never came until about several months ago. But since then, I've been obsessed with this release front to back. Luckily, rumors say they're working on something new coming in 2018, so I won't have to wait as long as everybody else has. Now to move on to music from this year that I wasn't so hot on. These are my biggest disappointments. Big Fish Theory by Vince Staples is mostly bland and generic hip-hop. There are 2 songs that differ from the sound of the rest of the album and show me that there could have been something great here. Big Fish and 745, but they don't pull up the rest of the tracks that mostly have weak beats and otherwise cluttered sounding production. This was actually my first introduction to his sound. I'd heard his name from trusted music-loving friends and found Vince Staples himself very interesting and funny in commercials and interviews. I wanted to be a fan of his, but I guess I can't be a fan of his music, at least not yet. Relaxer by Alt-J really disappointed me. I'd happened to stumble onto their 2012 record, An Awesome Wave, and was instantly reminded of the kind of sound I fell in love with when I listened to Look Look by Tuft, the number 2 pick on my 2016 list. I was looking forward to their new release, but what I got was an 8-track album filled with mostly interludes and what sounded like intros to songs that would never start. The track In Cold Blood is maybe the only one that sounds like anything I was looking for in the band, but everything around it just leaves so much to be desired. Revival by Eminem is a fairly sad record, for a number of reasons. It's not like Eminem hasn't made bad records before, but there are tracks on this one that seem to borrow the style from new mumble rappers in what feels like a desperate attempt to appeal to a younger audience. These songs are truly cringeworthy to me, but aside from that, there are so many guitar-heavy beats behind his lyrical delivery which do nothing for me. Some tracks are okay at best, but most are just bad. In keeping with the overwhelming vibe of desperation, there are several features from very popular pop singers, and honestly, those tracks are much better than Eminem on his own. They still aren't very good, but the performances from Beyonce, Ed Sheeran, and Pink are especially noteworthy. Speaking of good things, these are a couple really good albums that just missed my list this year. Tremendous Sea of Love by Passion Pit is a solid entry into their catalog. It carries a very tranquil sound throughout its entire runtime that ties the whole record together for me. I've yet to dislike anything from these guys so far, but the album didn't do anything to set itself apart from the others, so in that way it was like comfort music, but really good nonetheless. 444 by JayZ is a masterfully done introspective commentary on his current life. I'm not a particularly big JayZ fan, but his influence and talent can't be denied, and both are on display with this album. Production overall on the record was top notch, but it just didn't speak to me personally on a level that elevated it above anything else that actually made my list. Control by SZA was a surprise because a lot of my close friends know I'm not a big fan of R&B, with notable exceptions of course, but in general, it's not my thing. But SZA's hype was all over the place, and it was pushed on me by some friends whose music taste I trust, and almost immediately I was into it. Her sound, to me at least, is reminiscent of Frank Ocean and maybe a little Elle Varner. I'm still listening to it heavily, and it may have even made my list if I started a long time ago, but at the very least, I'm glad I gave it a shot. Okay, so now I'll go into my list, and I just want to remind everybody that this is purely based on my opinion and preferences. It's not meant in any way to be objective. I don't and can't listen to everything that's come out over the years, so if you feel like something's missing, throw it in your own list and post it in the comments. I might check it out. Number 5, Visuals by Mew. I've been listening to Mew since freshman year of college, and they have yet to release an album I didn't love in its entirety. They're easily one of my favorite artists ever, and the consistent quality of their album is impressive after all these years. The track 85 Videos is a standout for me. It's both upbeat and somber at the same time and maintains that signature spacey sound I love from them. Number 4, Wonderful Wonderful by The Killers. This album needed to grow on me at first. Like a lot of my favorite artists, the Killers have begun to evolve their sound, and it took a little getting used to, but once I did, I found myself thoroughly enjoying it, and in a different way than the music from them that's come before it. Their single, The Man, acted as the gateway to keep me coming back to it especially, and by extension, the rest of the album, which is amazing. Number 3, I See You, The XX. The XX is actually a band I really got into back around 2009 or so when their self-titled album was released, but I kind of forgot about them since then. They released I See You last January, and I only heard about it due to hype from a Facebook group I'm in. The XX, as I remember them, had a very mellow sound, and even more understated male-female vocals. The first track of their new album, Dangerous, blew my mind with its intro horns and thumping bass line, contrasted with their familiar whisper vocals. It's by far my favorite track on the album, and everything else is far more familiar, which is to say excellent musical arrangements, melodies, and deep, haunting lyrics. Number 2, Damn by Kendrick Lamar. I have to admit, I really liked To Pimp a Butterfly, but I just don't find myself listening to it with much regularity since its initial release. This hasn't been the case for Damn. Almost every track on the record is my favorite track, and is shorter and more focused in my opinion than his last effort. It released early in the year and is still in regular rotation. The first single, Humble, is also one of the most powerful and energetic tracks on the album, but it's in great company. The fact that the track list tells a distinct story that changes slightly if listened to in reverse order is just added genius to a new classic rap album in the making. Number 1, Something to Tell You by Haim. I've mentioned Haim briefly before in my Ed Sheeran Spotlight discussion, as I learned of their existence at around the same time. That same year, they released their amazing first album, Days Are Gone, and I've waited for more from them since. Haim doesn't sound like any other group I've ever heard before. That's not to say that they sound completely out there. It's like a mix of pop and funk with 3-part female harmonies abound. The music is catchy and complex, and the vocal style is just so unique to them. Something to Tell You continues the feel of Days Are Gone, but certain tracks like Nothing's Wrong and Right Now seem to hint at just how musically complex they have the ability to get. I haven't listened to any other album this year more than Something to Tell You. It was just a constant go-to for me, and I'll be listening to it for a very long time to come, I'm sure. So those are my top 5s of 2017, but I really do want to see some of your top 5s. Just throw them in the comments. Music is relative, and I've got an open mind. I'll check out any suggestion if it seems promising, and I urge you to check out everything I've listed if you haven't already, because it's some of the best music of the year in my opinion. So, what do you think of the list? Am I dead on or missing something very important? Let us know. We're listening.